Hi, and welcome to Two Wheeled Views. I'm Nathan. This is the channel I started to talk all things motorcycles, simply because my wife and friends were sick of me talking about only motorcycles with them. So, needed an outlet, and if that's you, you love talking about motorcycles, you're in the right place. Now in this video, I'm going to dive into what it's like to start on a Ninja 300 or any 300cc class motorcycle for that matter. Now I am 6'5", so obviously I'm a bigger guy starting on a Ninja 300, which when most people hear that, they actually find it pretty comedic. They can't imagine me being on a Ninja 300, especially considering the bike that I'm on now, which will have more content to come on what I'm currently riding, other bikes that I've owned throughout the years. Got some pictures back here of the bikes that I've owned throughout the years, including the Ninja 300. But today I want to focus on kind of what it's like to start on a Ninja 300, why it might be a good bike for you to start on, why it might not be. There's obviously a lot of beginner bikes out there. The market's pretty flooded. So I wanted to provide some information that might help you make the decision and hopefully get more people on two wheels. It is my true belief that the world would be a better place if more people were riding motorcycles. Now, people get into riding motorcycles for a lot of different reasons. Sometimes your family was just always riding. Your parents rode sport bikes, you rode sport bikes, and you just got into it from a young age. Other times people ride dirt bikes throughout the years, and then they get a little bit older, they want to go a little bit faster, they end up moving into sport bikes. Now, most of those people that I know, people who I'm currently friends with, who rode dirt bikes when they were younger and bought their first street bike, for whatever reason, there's this stigma that 300s, 250s, 300s, 400s are a bad first bike. They're like, oh, I know how to control a clutch and a throttle, or I know how to ride. I don't need a 300 or 400. Now, for some people, sure. There's a lot of people that I'm sure you got your keyboard warriors already leaving comments about how, hey, I started on a 636 and it was great, or I started on a leader bike, or heaven forbid, I started on a Booza and I didn't die. Good for you. This is the story about how personally, I don't know if I'd still be here had I started on a leader bike. So there's a lot of stuff about why I am grateful that I started on a 300 when I did. Now I bought my first motorcycle in 2014. It was a discounted Ninja 300 from a dealership. I knew nothing about bikes. I come from the situation where not a single person in my family drove a motorcycle. I don't even think my dad did his own oil changes. Love him to death, but not the most mechanically inclined. That was not something that was part of my upbringing. Now at this point, I obviously love motorcycles, work on them for the most part myself, definitely have come a long way. But when I bought my first bike, walked into a dealership, was simply looking for something that looked cool, that I thought would look fast. My buddy at the time had an FZ8, he was helping me out, and there it was, this beautiful 2013 SE Ninja 300. Hopefully I can find a picture of it, throw it up there for you. And the price was right? It wasn't too expensive. It's a 300. What can go wrong? So we did the dealer financing. I got a jacket. I got helmet. I got an exhaust, slip-on exhaust included in the financing. Threw that all in, which don't totally recommend. We'll get into kind of another video about what I recommend for people getting into motorcycling, no matter what the bike is. But the 300 at the end of the day ended up being a really good route to take. Now, once I had the bike, I started learning. I rode it every day. I bought it in March. It was living in Utah at the time, so the weather was great. I rode it every day for the next 6 months, tried to get as proficient as I could. Ended up moving in with two of my friends who also both had motorcycles. It's kind of how I got into more of the group riding. We rode up canyons on a regular basis, really started pushing my boundaries in that sense. And there was a lot of times where I made mistakes, and the bike was really forgivable, which kind of leads me into a little bit about some of the pros and cons when you are deciding what bike you want to start on. Now, when I was making this list, it was very apparent to me that even now, 9 years into riding, the fact that I own a much different motorcycle than a Ninja 300, I still believe that there are a lot more benefits and a lot more pros to starting on a 300 than there are cons. So to start off, I want to touch on the cons, the things that everybody talks about. So one, people talk about they're slow. Right, you started on a dirt bike, oh, I want to go fast, I know how to control a bike, 300s are too slow, okay? First of all, Ninja 300, it'll do 115 miles per hour. Now, are you at the top of 6th gear, full red line? Yes, but as far as it being too slow, it's not, right? You go watch YouTube videos, you'll find videos of 300s, 400s passing other guys on the racetrack. It happens, right? They're not slow. They are slower than a lot of other bikes, But to say that they're slow, to say that you can't do what needs to be done, to say that you couldn't go on a road trip, I wouldn't agree with that. But at the end of the day, in comparison to those other bikes, yes, they are slow. So that would be considered a con in the fact that you're talking 30, 40 horsepower versus 180 of some other bikes, right? Or 200 plus. So obviously first con there. Second con would be that they are low spec. Now, in today's market, this has changed a little bit, right? You look at the ZX4RR that just came out, and it has some higher spec material on it. Higher spec brakes, higher spec chassis. Right, you're talking, you've got the R7, which basically is the MT-07, and its biggest flaw was its chassis and suspension, and they improved that. Now, R7, obviously, arguably where it falls in the line of beginner bike. We'll get into that in another video as well, which I'll link down below if I have those posted just yet. But yeah, as far as the low spec, you can find that, right? If you're looking at a 2013 Ninja 300, it's got very base level suspension, base brakes, right? The chassis is nothing to write home about. It's just not the most high spec machine on the market. But when you're getting into motorcycling, that's not what you need. You just need something with an engine and 2 wheels to go have fun, something that's reliable, which a lot of these 300 class bikes really are. Now the last con that I could think of, which honestly I feel like I was scraping for, like those first two, pretty common, was the ergos. Now I'm 6'5", so that's why it's a big issue for me, right? Starting on a Ninja 300 or CBR 250 back when they were 250 still, or Gixxer 250, in my opinion, the worst beginner bike you could possibly buy. Won't get into that. But I'm a big guy, right? So sitting on one of those smaller bikes, that's why a lot of people laugh at it. Which it wasn't the most uncomfortable. Honestly, yeah, I feel like my knees hit the side of the tank where they probably shouldn't have, a little bit more than you would have liked, but at the time I didn't really know better. Honestly, I had no idea that the ergos were off. Now when I sit on a 300 now, I still think that they're a lot of fun. I think the engines are a lot of fun to ride, but the ergos are a little off. Now diving into the pros list, I feel like that's where it really starts to show, right? So first off, a 300 or 400 or whatever is extremely forgivable. Like I said, I had whiskey throttle week 1 that I had on the 300, bumped up over a curb and into a bush, busted off a piece of the front little fairing. Super embarrassing. Now, I was on a 300, so yeah, that happened. Yeah, it was embarrassing, but I'm still here, right? I didn't loop it. I didn't get road rash. I didn't fly off the back, which I feel like could have happened on a bigger bike. So it was very forgivable in that sense. Another experience the first week where I accidentally dropped the clutch too early with too much revs because I was trying to get out of the way from another car. The front wheel came up. Right? I popped a tiny little wheelie on a Ninja 300. If I were on any bigger bike, say even like an MT-07 like I mentioned before, I would have looped it. And I actually have a really good friend of mine who did loop his MT-07 that he bought as his first bike. So the fact that I was able to make that mistake completely unscathed, continue on my ride totally fine, goes to show how forgivable 300s really are. The next point that's still in its favor is how fun they can be. I've been riding for 9 years, riding much faster motorcycles. Every time I still hop on a 300, I hopped on a KTM 390 Duke the other day, rode friend's R3 the other day around the neighborhood. They are fun. You can rev them out. You come off of first gear, you come off the stop, you rev on the throttle, and it just goes. And it's just fun. You don't have as much concern. You actually can hit red line from stoplight to stoplight or from stop sign to stop sign. Whereas if you're on a leader bike, you're not hitting red line between stop signs. And if you are, we've got other things to talk about. Last couple points go hand in hand. I would say that the last couple benefits or pros are that they are a little bit less technological, less advanced, making it a little bit easier to work on, except for maybe the RS660 line from Aprilia. Couple of the newer bikes that are coming out that are still 600, 700 cc's for the most part. Those 400 cc bikes for the most part are very mechanical. Maybe they've got ABS, which is what you want as a new bike. And so you probably can do some of the work on them yourselves, or you can start to try to do some of the work on them yourselves. And with that, because they're less advanced, they're typically a little bit cheaper, right? So I'll get into a whole buyer's guide about what it's like to buy a beginner bike and the path that I recommend doing it. But as far as the expense goes out the door, you can typically get a beginner bike for a little bit less than you can those other bikes. And beginner meaning an old Ninja 300, old Ninja 400. So no matter what bike you're on or what bike you're thinking about getting, as long as it's not a Gixxer 250, you're making a good decision. And I'm happy that you're buying a motorcycle, and I'm happy that you're on 2 wheels. I'm a true believer that the world would be a better place if more people were riding motorcycles. So remember, you don't necessarily need to ride safe, just get home safe. Have a good one.